Maybe we can do a quick introduction about yourself. So you were born in 1987. You're both Irish and German. You're an artist, photographer. You write a lot, poetry, poems, and texts. You went to the University of the Arts in Berlin, and you also went to Central St. Martin's in London. And your artistic practice talked a lot about social mutations, changes in the city, urbanization, and also gentrification, specifically in your hometown in Berlin. You also you have been awarded from Berliner Gallery, German Academy Exchange, and you also benefited from the fellow of Villa Aurora in Los Angeles. So it's nice. Cool. Yeah. And after various personal and professional experiences, you decided to go back to your hometown in Berlin to work there and to live there. So it's great. And Cadet Capla is organizing your first big solo show here entitled Hues, and from the 23rd of November until 18th of January. So you have time to go back and tell to your friends to come. I think maybe it can be interesting to start to have talk a little bit about your backgrounds.
I went to school as everyone else. I did Le Bac, l'Abitur in Germany. And after that, I always had a feeling I wanted to travel also and get out of Berlin. Because Berlin now, when we speak about it, it's become a really also diverse hotspot for people from all over the world, and it's become really colorful and beautiful, by now also really expensive. But the place I grew up in was still really coined by the fall of the wall. So I grew up in West Berlin, which is obviously very different from, still is very different from East Berlin. And I would say also my upbringing, the first 20 years of my life, or 15, 20 years, was still in that echo of the reunification also. So that really coined me also in a way. And then going back to what I wanted to say, that Berlin back then was not that colorful place that it is now, maybe. I remember my youth being actually quite grey in a way. I mean, I was a happy child. I had loads of friends, it was all good and lovely, but just walking through the streets, you have half a year winter, it's tough also, winter is tough. If you have to go to school and get the tram or the metro, it takes a while. And so I think my early adulthood or my late youth was really coined by, I have this feeling of winters outside, just meeting other random boys on the streets, getting into trouble also a bit. And that's basically the lens with which I look at the world even today still, because I just carry that so deep inside of me. And so I also wanted to get away from that. In a way, it was clear for me, I was as many people are, just in their youth or in their young adulthood, I was just a curious person. And then somehow I managed to get into internships and opportunities that would allow me also to go elsewhere. So for example, in 2011 I had an internship in Bolivia for 3 months for the Goethe Institute, and then prior for that I went to India also. I spent a lot of time in South America after the Goethe Institute also. Through my studies I was able to go to Spain, and I lived a year in Valencia and also in Barcelona, which really informed also my upbringing, my young adulthood, I think, just being away. And so for me, in developing my work also, it was really important to get away from Berlin. So between 20 and 30, I think I lived elsewhere for 7 years, also in London for 2 years. And I think the being away really allowed me to then reflect on my own life and what I went through also as a person, and then what I feel towards the place I come from, and how I can express that possibly in art practice.
You work a lot about gentrification, about what's happening now in Berlin, and also with the COVID time, the prices are increasing a lot, and I think we experienced this in Paris in a very different way, but most of the people here doesn't really know the situation in Berlin. But do you think your work is politically engaged? How do you feel about taking pictures of this city situation, because you're trying to walk a lot in the city and understand like the urban changes and all the social mutations in the city and all the social inequalities. So how do you manage to like show to your work this very important parts of, like for example in the book that you published, Stadt für alle. Sorry for my German, it's really bad. But like you talked about a lot about this topic. So how do you feel about, you know?
So I do definitely talk about that, but as vain as it sounds, I basically just talk about myself. So, and also all my work in the end is only about myself, and it is politically motivated in a way because I am just a politically thinking person. I don't think art in any way has to be political, but just because I am the person I am, and I think about the things that I do, and say if I realize the town I grew up in and my whole social environment is being put under extreme pressure, which has already been a long time, but it's getting even worse, then that does something to me, and that results, just because I happen to be an artist, like, or I happen to do what I do, this also influences my practice. So it's not as much as I go about and think about grand statements about the world, because I don't think I can make them, because I'm not smart enough, or I don't know enough, and I don't believe anyone really knows enough to make big statements anyway. But then what I can speak about is my own feelings, my own experience, and that I'm also certain about that, and that for me is level ground, so I feel very steady in that. A pitfall of photography often is, in general, or of art practice also in general, is beautifying things, and I'm very much against that. I think to a certain extent one actually has to go against that and be honest about other feelings too, because like our life is not just beautiful, it's also tense and then can be dure, and there's hassle or struggle, and all of that also kind of finds its way into my practice.
So this exhibition is entitled Hues. So why you decided to call it like this, and is it mainly photography that you created for Stadt für alle, or is it new things that you created? Is it mainly shot in Berlin, or because I saw as well that you took a lot of pictures in like Los Angeles, Berlin, in Spain as well. So how did you decide to construct this show?
For me, what's important and what I try to do with my work is basically just express what I carry inside of me and translate that into images and texts. So for me, although it may seem different, but to me, eventually or essentially, the place is not that important to understand my work. Although a lot of it comes from Berlin, it's not just exclusively about Berlin, I would say. Maybe to understand my practice, it's good to keep in mind that there's several, I'd say, groups of works which I put in dialogue with each other. So for example, there's images of the inner city, which you can see scattered around. There's like moments of more fragile moments, I would say, or bittersweet moments, maybe like this one. There's the silk screen prints. There's references to class, with this piece, for example, Almost Citizen. And so what I try to do in general with my work is bring these topics in context with each other, in dialogue with each other. And so hues to me means also, it's basically a different way of saying the different facets or the different shades of work. And since this is the first exhibition in France since 2016, or the first real proper gallery show here, for me it was important to show the different facets of my work.
You take a lot of photos inside the city, so sometimes it's a bit rough. You have concrete, you have like construction works. So yeah, it can be an image of the city a bit like, rough. But you always find some like natural pieces inside your work, like you have like grass or plants or like butterflies. So, and I also checked online, and you did this book called Wildlife Photography a long time ago.
Yeah.
So what is your relationship to all these natural elements that you can just integrate into your works?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's particularly on my mind at all. It's just, I think in general, I follow what my body reacts to. And so if I see a certain situation or have a feeling that here something comes together, and I would say rarely would you find just a beautiful picture of a plant or so in my work, but if you find it, maybe it's in context of something else. Like for example, that work here, Hues, you still see the graffiti in the background and the kind of more urban landscape in there too.
You're working a lot with poems and poetry, and you have many like hip-hop references as well. Inside the exhibitions you will see there is many works with like writings on it, and there is another one just there with writings, I hope I will say it right, still trying to deal with a world that favors the loud. So what is your relationship to works like, because I feel like your practice of photography and your practice of writings are quite intertwined and it's quite complementary, but how do you feel about writings? Like, do you have specific methods? Are you like shooting something and then writing about it, or?
My writing practice actually precedes my photographic practice. I just never allowed it any space or time, or never really cared about it so much. But only then, in my own development as becoming an artist really, and realizing what I do, at some point I just thought, hey, maybe it's worth it not just throwing it all away. And so I kept what I wrote from 2016 onwards. And just, I think at some point I just applied that also into my my work as an artist in general, and just didn't shy away from publishing that, because I feel equally as the photographs, so does the writing have a similar manner of rhetoric. So also my writing, I write both in German and in English, and my writing would have rough elements in it, but also kind of more sensual elements in it. And in these works are also, you know, with some of them you can clearly read what I wrote, but with other ones you can't really read what I wrote, and it doesn't really matter, because for me also they help me to leave form behind, or have the type leave form behind, and here the type becomes, leave content behind, and the type here becomes form. And that also to me is an interesting space where the writing stops having meaning almost and becomes part of the image.
Do you have any, like we talked about it as well last week, about your artistic influence? So you're German, and it's like a land of photography for like, you know, from the 20s, 30s, and then with the School of Düsseldorf, there is all this, you know, photographers coming from, you know, this school. In a very like documentary and very, you know, exactly, way of seeing photography. Very German way. How do you feel about all this influence, like German influences? Do you feel like you are, you know?
In that school? No, definitely not. Without, and it's funny because also...
It's not black and white, you never use black and white photography, you know, it's always... Yeah, this one, but it's mostly colorful. And
No, I don't. It's not so much also, I think, I mean, just to also basically explain where I come from. So I ended up really in the art world because that's what really attracted me a lot also. So when I started taking pictures, I was still really, I knew all about this like Magnum stuff and so, but I realized it doesn't really do anything so much to me. And then because I never had previously, like say from my family or so, I'd never encountered really art practice. And then only just happening to be at an arts university, I did a different degree, but that was the first times I actually came in contact with really like what is art practice. And for me, there's this kind of photo world, and there's just contemporary art world, and it's a bit quite apart actually. Some of them interlap, but mostly they don't really. And I think I went through that visual education with photography, and it was great, and I loved it, and it was really important for me also. But then I ended up somewhere else, and so all that school, like the Düsseldorf school and so, when I got to know that really late in my life. I think photography is a tricky medium in contemporary art because you're always are often bound to representation, and then representation often leads to documenting something, and documenting something is very linear. So and then there's no mystery, and also as an artist, where are you in that? So also with me, when I produce my works, I always think, okay, where am I in that? Like me as a person, me as an artist, and not as someone who depicts reality, because that's what photography, classical photography do. But I don't even want to do that. For example, I want to depict my inner world, really. And that's a totally different endeavor. And so there's a fine line. And then I think some people manage kind of to do both. Some are more in this way, there, some a bit more there. It's all great. So there's no better or worse than anything. But I think it is important to be conscious about, as a person working with photography in general, where do you want to be? Like what do you want to say also? Blah.